Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a fabulous webinar presented by ATG. Today I'm going to be your host, I'm going to be your host for today, excuse me, Don Rasmusson. I'm the Director of MEP Services here at ATG, and today we're going to be talking about what's in your pipes, the MEP edition. We're going to focus on Revit and what it means to be a piping designer in Revit. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the setups and the things that we have to go through? We're going to first start taking a look at the out-of-the-box templates that Revit provides and what piping systems and types come across with that. We're then going to use that to start talking about the difference between system classification versus system type in Revit. I meet with people obviously all the time, and I often find myself in these conversations. I just found it myself in this conversation last week about Revit pipe types versus Revit pipe systems and how both of those should be leveraged. So we're going to get into that in the presentation as well. We're also going to get into what are the pipe systems inside of CTC's MEPPP. The MEPPP is a pretty predominant productivity pack tool for Revit that CTC creates. Let's take a look at how CTC has started to push the envelope of what those systems can actually do and kind of take a look at what all you could potentially attain for visibility control, graphical control, system types, and flow. And then we'll wrap up by talking about how we can leverage the content to be more efficient as piping designers. Some tips and tricks about laying things out. There's lots of commands that are in Revit after you lay a piece of pipe, or you're about to lay a piece of pipe that are contextual commands that a lot of us often forget about, or we may have used it, say, in 2014, and we decided that we didn't want to use it ever again, but that command has been updated and it's gotten improved over the years. And so we'll take a look at that as well. So let's just go ahead and dive right in to Revit. I'll open up my Revit screen here. And you'll see that I'm looking at a tuned Revit environment at the moment, right? I've got the pipe types and the pipe systems dropped down. We'll be coming back here. This happens to be the MEPPP environment. But I wanted to show you opening up a template, or rather opening up a new Revit project with a template, and talk a little bit about that if you're starting with Revit out of the box and you don't have a template. So I'm going to file open here, and I'm going to create another project. Save for this, comes across, yep, save, okay. All right. And now here you have the list of default templates that come with Revit. You'll notice that you have a systems default template down here at the bottom. You also have a plumbing default template and a mechanical default template. I'm going to start by loading the systems default template, and just so everybody on the call understands, this is if you have nothing else going for you in Revit in terms of a template, the systems default template is usually the best way to start. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close down my email. The systems default template is the best place to start because by default, it loads all systems that are available in a template form into Revit right out of the box. Whereas plumbing is going to try to load specific plumbing systems and specific mechanical systems, but we'll be taking a little bit of a look at that. So I'll just start this now with the systems default template. And we'll take a peek here. Close up all the views and look at the families, come down to our pipes and expand the pipe types and expand the piping systems. Now what you'll see here, everyone, is kind of a hodgepodge use of where pipe types and systems come together. And so I want to talk a little bit here about system classification versus system type, and kind of pipe types versus pipe systems, because this is a really good example when we look at this template out of the box. You'll look at pipe types up here, and you'll notice that you have a chilled water pipe type, you have a PVC domestic waste and vent pipe type, and then you have a standard pipe type. The chilled water pipe type is kind of created as a system. In Revit, to use pipes properly, your pipe types are the physical materials that create the pipe. So copper K, copper L, copper M, PVC, domestic waste and vent, CPVC, ABS, whatever types of pipes you're trying to make. Of course, copper K, copper L, copper M can carry wide variants of a system inside of it. And so that is how Revit is intended to be used. you create the pipe type, and the pipe type, for example, if I right click on, for example, domestic waste and vent here, and I'll go to type properties, you can see here in the pipe types that this is where you set up your routing preferences. You'll also be able to notice that after you've set up your routing preferences, that there is not a system type designation anywhere in here for pipe types. It's unfortunate for some people. I'm one of those people. I wish that we could do this, but I wish we could take a pipe type and tie it to a set amount of systems so that you could only apply the systems that are really applicable to that pipe type. Revit's pretty wide open as far as that's concerned right now. And so you could say, for example, use a PVC domestic waste and vent system, or pipe type rather, and then assign that the domestic cold water system. So Revit's not going to have anything inside of it that forces you to be correct, if you will. The way that we can get around that is with some filters and some visibility control that shows our users that they're using improper pipe types as assigned to the system. But if you come in here to routing preferences, guys, I'll come back here really quick. And as long as I'm here, we'll look at the routing preferences, and I want you to notice something here, that you can put an elbow in, you can set a preferred junction type. That preferred junction type can be a tap or a T. If I come down here to junction settings, you see I have a T sanitary put in there as the fitting type for the T. But I have a cross, a transition, a union, a flange, a cap. I don't have a Y capability. You cannot set up Ys in routing preferences in Revit. Now there's workarounds. We can trick a Y into thinking it's a T, and then it becomes an option under the junction type of a T. There's some inherent problems with that though. One of the biggest ones is that Revit does not understand pipe jog. Revit thinks that wherever you click is where you want to make your connection in the pipe. And so if you want to go ahead and set up something like a Y in a routing preference, this one right here, T sanitary PVC schedule 40 domestic waste and vent, this is a nice little cheat fitting. And the reason it's a cheat fitting, everybody, is because if I click to place this fitting and then I click to draw my branch off and I choose to draw that branch at a 45-degree angle, this T actually adjusts to look more like a Y. Now it just looks like a Y, everyone. It doesn't schedule a Y. It only schedules a sanitary T. There's some hitches in the giddy up here, but you can use that if you're trying to promote faster, more efficient layouts of pipe, especially at an engineering or design level. So just a little nugget there for you guys to understand. Of course, pipe sizes and segments, and we can get into setting up those here in a minute. As we go through the pipe systems, but we'll come back to the pipe types and go through all these different settings and what the segments and size, excuse me, and how you utilize them. But if we shift now a little bit to looking at pipe systems, if I right click on a pipe system, and I'll go to the type properties for that, you will notice that you have graphic overrides up here. Your systems drive your graphics. Not uncommon for us, even back in the CAD days. Our graphics and our colors, our line types, line weights, those were driven by systems, not by pipe types. So that control is still here. You can edit that. You can make any color, any pattern, any line weight you want. But you'll notice here, if I go down to the mechanical area, a little bit up from my cursor, you'll see a line item here, a parameter called system classification. Notice it's domestic cold water. It matches what's called out over here under pipe systems. And as a matter of fact, if we go down this entire pipe systems list on an out-of-the-box systems default template, these are your actual system classifications, okay? Now, what is system classification? System classification in Revit is what drives all analytics. So if you want your pipes to be able to propagate flow and you want to start to leverage the analytical information that Revit can provide to you, you have to be very cognizant of what system classifications you have assigned to your pipe systems. You'll notice that this is grayed out. So the way that I make an additional pipe system is I right click on one that already exists and I duplicate it. And then I go in and I rename that and I start setting it up and I start editing it. But you'll notice if I go into type properties here, since I duplicated domestic cold water, it automatically assigns the system classification that was assigned to the domestic cold water, in this case, which happens to be domestic cold water, okay? So that means as you're going about creating additional pipe systems, you should always go in and verify that you're duplicating one that is on the proper system classification. Because you'll notice if I click in here, I cannot change this. I cannot update system classification once it has been assigned to a pipe system. So this is a very important step that you need to take first when you're doing setup. There's a lot of people who use domestic cold properly, domestic hot properly. They're pretty intuitive, right? They make sense. Hydronic return and hydronic supply, again, intuitive, makes sense. But if it's not one of those four, they tend to put it under other. The system classifications that do not propagate any flow whatsoever are going to be fire protection dry, fire protection other, fire protection pre-action, fire protection wet, other, and vent. None of those system classifications can do any analytics for you in Revit. The only thing that they can do is system volume. So when you're going about creating your system types and you want to have those analytics in Revit, it's important to remember that the system classifications drive this. And so when we're creating these, we want to create these system types under the proper system classifications. For us, and we'll be seeing this in the MEPPP, the MEPPP leverages only 5 system classifications: domestic hot, domestic cold, hydronic return, hydronic supply, and sanitary. Sanitary is for drainage pipe only, but we leverage this sanitary system classification for things like vent pipe and other things that we can use from a sanitary perspective, because sanitary will allow you to propagate flow and add fixture units, for example, as you move down the line. Whereas if we made it in the vent category, for example, you wouldn't be able to do that. And so basically my rule of thumb, guys, is if it's a plumbing pipe, if it's for my plumbing domestic pressurized service to the building, this could be, you know, hot water, recirc, 140-degree water, whatever it is that you're creating, those all go under my domestic pipe types, be it cold or hot, or my system classifications, excuse me. If I'm doing anything else other than drainage, anything other than sanitary, and I don't care if it's gas piping, I don't care if it's medical gas piping, I don't care if it's vac piping, whatever the piping system is, it should go under this hydronic return or hydronic supply system classification based upon the direction of the flow. Okay, so we, like I said earlier, in the MEPPP, we leverage the 5: hydronic return, hydronic supply, domestic cold, domestic hot, and sanitary. Okay, so understanding your system classifications and the fact that those are the only things that drive analytics in Revit, I want to show you something else about system classifications. You might be saying to yourself, hey, that's great information that I didn't know before. Let's clean this up so my users don't get confused. So if I come over here to one of these system classifications and try to delete this, I'm going to get an error. There has to be at least one system classification inside of Revit at all times. One domestic cold, domestic hot, like read down that list, one of those has to exist inside the Revit environment at all times. And so if you want to go about deleting these, you can't delete these. You can't clean system classifications up. I'm very fond of explaining them like, you know, they're energy. They cannot be created, they cannot be destroyed, they can simply be transferred into other things. So you use them to create other system types. And then we'll see in the MEPPP that we actually go in and mark some of these that we haven't leveraged, ZZ do not use. So they're down at the bottom. And so your users won't use them as often or have a little bit more of a struggle finding them. So user interfaces or user interaction is maximized. So if I cancel out of this really quick, and we've talked about obviously the out-of-the-box pipe types a little bit. We've talked about system classifications and system types here and the difference between them. I want to turn my attention to the pipe type up here that you see as chilled water. Now, it is common practice in older versions of Revit prior to us actually getting pipe systems, guys. Pipe systems did not come across until about, I think it was released 2013, 2012 is when Revit actually had pipe systems. And a lot of us used to just simply make the pipe types as a system. And we see an example of this here still inside of an out-of-the-box Revit template. Now, obviously what I explained initially was that we make pipe types as the material, and then we assign the system to, or that the material of pipe is going to be carrying. Some people still leverage pipe types this way as chilled water, for example. So if I right click on this and go to the type properties here, you'll see that, you know, I can control routing preferences. I can control some things here as a pipe type, obviously, but I don't have any graphical control. I would have to apply a filter or an override at some point in some view to get color changes that I would like to be able to see to drive my design, drive my engineering, right? Educate me onto what system is what pipe is carrying. And so that's where this kind of starts to break down, is that there's a whole nother level of control here under pipe systems that can be leveraged to standardize your process, standardize your appearance of your documents and the views that your users are seeing. So we've got some questions here, guys, and I always like to take questions, you know, when they're relevant. And we got a question here about what about when pipes from different classifications that tie together, such as with a three-way valve, or one changes the other classification, i.e. the hydronic return and the return and a bypass. That is a great question. Cross-system connection and cross-system functionality inside of Revit is a challenge, right? I run into it a lot when I did plumbing design with a vent system versus a sewer system, right? When we connected all of that together, Revit didn't quite understand where the sewer stopped being a sewer and the vent started. In order to get around that, and I'll just come over here to the mechanical, electrical, plumbing productivity pack since the question came up, guys. I want to show you a view in here that shows you a family that they've put together, and I want you to take a peek at this. So either, you know, if you want to purchase the pack, obviously that's great, but here's some ideas of what you might be able to incorporate into your documents. So I'm just going to come in here, go to a plumbing view. Oh, demolition. My fault, guys. My apologies. That's better. So I'm going to come in here to this plumbing plan, and I'm going to find the system split T is what is referred to by CTC. Pipe type, let's go to a working view, guys. My apologies here, because I'll be a fine level of detail and everything is controlled with view templates. So if I come in here to a working view, I will find that fitting, which is right here. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that the fitting is colored black. I'll turn on my thick lines here so it's a little bit easier to see, okay? When something has a bunch of connections into it inside of Revit and it remains black, that means it's not designated to a specific system. You may have noticed this with any connections you've done. If you connect into a water closet with the sanitary system first, that water closet turns itself the color of the sanitary system that was designated in your Revit environment. And so if I click on this particular fitting here, you'll notice that this was just a family that was created by CTC. We just took the one out of the box, and all we did was change the connector settings on this specific family, and we created a couple of them. We have a system split that's not a double sanitary T. We have that in a vertical and a horizontal application. And then, of course, we have this double split system T. And all you really have to do is open up these families, do a save as, call it a system split, and then set the connectors to the specific system that they are. So in this configuration that we see here, it would be sanitary sewer, sanitary sewer, sanitary sewer, and vent out the top. And this should help fix some of the cross-system functionality, where it starts to break down. This also, another part of this is the fact that we use the system classifications the way we did. So if I come down to the pipe system types in the MEPPP, we will notice that if I find the vent system type, so here's sanitary vent, let's look at the type properties for that. We can see that that has been done under the sanitary system classification. So it shares the same system class as the sanitary sewer, which makes life a little bit easier for that system split. And system split connections and fittings, guys, have a huge role to play, not just in plumbing. They can exist for hydronic, they can exist for ductwork. System split fittings is a big way to get around the cross system issues, you know, if you're thinking outdoor air into return air or supply air, right? However we have to do that, you can just simply take some of these fittings, redesignate the connectors, and move forward in that vein. And that helps fix a lot of it. All right, we got some more questions here, everybody. Got a question about how do the analytics differ between the domestic hot and cold and the hydronic supply and return system classifications? In terms of the analytics and their capabilities, there isn't a difference between the two. They both have the same capabilities of system classification. They're both gonna be able to do all the analytics you want. Now, if the question is more about what units are available to you maybe in Revit, Revit only sees GPM and fixture units as units of measure for flow through pipe, okay? Now you can get to things like cubic feet per hour with a little bit of math and GPM trickery, right? It's another thing that the MEPPP has done is that they're propagating two things that Revit natively doesn't do. They're propagating CFH for gas piping, and they're propagating square footage for rainwater liter calculations, which is actually pretty nice. You can click on your rainwater liter at any point and know exactly how much square footage it's responsible for. So I hope that answers your question. I've got another question here. Is like, if you color code your pipe systems instead of types and filters, do others who link your file have the ability to adjust display of the line work in their file? Absolutely. You would have visibility graphic override controls at the link level that you could override all of that with. As a matter of fact, it may be more difficult to do that from a filter standpoint because as you link something in my experience, you don't get access to those linked filters unless you go into the actual link itself and start doing specific views. So that may add another layer of complexity to the control. The system types are pretty simple to override on a linked model by just simply going into visibility graphics and dealing with it that way. Got another question here about how do you send system class to piping system? So how do you put a system classification to a piping set? And that is, guys, if we duplicate one of these, we have to make sure we duplicate the right one. So in an environment where we're not in the out-of-box template and it's not a apples to apples comparison, right, where the list is basically the system classifications, this may be a little more in tune with what you're dealing with at work, where you have some made already and now you need to make another one. You need to know what to do. The first step is going to be to either double click on the one that you want to duplicate or right click on it and go to type properties. Either way gets you into the properties. The next thing you'll do is read the system classification. Notice it's grayed out. I can't do anything with this. And so that means that if I don't want to create the new piping system I'm about to create on the hydronic system supply system classification, then I need to go find one of these that's the proper system classification for me to duplicate. So maybe if I come down here to, let's go plumbing, cold water. So we'll right click, go to type properties. That one's made on domestic cold water. That's the system class I want to leverage for the new pipe type I'm going to make. And so I would choose, say, okay, let's duplicate that. Now, once that's duplicated, I can rename it. I'll just call it demo for now. Then once demo is made, again, I can double click on it again, and I can go in here and I can start changing things like my fluid type, the temperatures of said fluid types. You can set all this up. Abbreviation of the system is probably one of the biggest ones that we want to set up, obviously. We'll get into this a little bit later on in the presentation and why that's important. So that's where you would go to do this. And of course, graphic overrides are there that you can apply. And your rise and drop symbols are right here as well. So you can really dial in what your settings should be for a specific system. But I promised you I would get into segments and sizes a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the one mech here and start looking at out of the box and what's, systems and sizes are for. You can always go to the Manage tab, everybody, go into your MEP settings, go into mechanical settings, and then your piping stuff here is you're going to be able to do some segments and sizes right here. Okay, that's where that level of control is. My preferred method when I'm creating these is to do everything right here in the project browser so I can see things as they're created, and I got an easier way of tracking things. So if we go to the one that I duplicated here initially, I'm going to right click on that, go into type properties, and I'm going to go into the, oh, excuse me, I'm on a system. I need to be up here. We're talking about segments and sizes. My apologies, guys. So I'll come in here to PVC, domestic weights, and vent, and then I'll go to type properties. When I go into the routing preferences here and I'm setting this up, here is your segments and sizes button. Here's also a load family button. This thing is really nice when you're setting up segments and sizes. One of the methods I've used when I've had to create hundreds of different pipe types and systems for manufacturers, I will unload all the fittings, everything, strip Revit of everything. And then I will come in here and start creating these, and I will load the fittings as I need them. When I use that method, I can guarantee that I don't have a whole lot of bloat in my Revit file. I'm only loading what I need for that pipe type. But if we click on the segments and sizes button, brings you right back out to the mechanical settings right where we were. And I'll expand this a little bit so everybody can see. Up here at the top, you'll have copper K. You drop that down, you notice that you have L, M, a couple different ductile irons, a couple PVCs, a couple stainless, right? Each one of these that we pick, it's going to have segments and sizes underneath it. These segments and sizes are important, everyone, because if these are not accurate, things like system volume calcs are going to be off. The roughness value is not set accurate. Head pressure calcs are going to be off. See, the roughness value is right up here. Okay, so it's important to make sure our baseline root information is accurate so that we can have confidence in our calcs. Okay, so you would come in here and create new sizes like you see here, or delete sizes. You'll notice that as I click around in here, I cannot amend anything that's in here. You can either create or destroy. So when you're going through this process, it's a really good idea to gather all your information, get it right in front of you, and then start. You can't edit it after the fact. Some other things that you might notice as levels of control here are used in size list and used in sizing. The size list is the drop down when you draw a piece of pipe over here. It says what size do you want to make it. You can hit a drop down and you can select any one of these sizes that you've generated for that specific pipe type. If you don't want it to appear in the list, so like say for example, I used to work for an engineer who went by a saying when it came to plumbing piping, and his saying was never order 1 1/4 inch, because he didn't like 1 1/4 inch pipe size. He thought it was too expensive, and you got the same performance out of 1 or 1.5. You could just skip over that pipe size. Okay. So when I was working for him, I came into the Revit environment knowing that he did not like to do that, and I had an 1 1/4 inch pipe made for copper, and I just went ahead and turned it off in the sizing list, so that the users didn't even get the sizing option for 1 1/4 inch as they went to that drop down. And this just kind of hides it. But if you wanted to type in 1 1/4 inch, you could still draw 1 1/4 inch pipe. If you want to take that level of control away from your users and force them into the system, or excuse me, the sizes and segments that you've created that you want them to use, you simply uncheck that box. And now, as far as Revit is concerned, that size is in the environment. It can be turned back on, but it doesn't show up in your sizing list, and you can't type that size in. If you sit down and go through the effort to create all the different segments and sizes that you're going to need in Revit, I recommend that you do all of them. You do the 1/4 inch copper all the way through 6 inch copper. And then you use these check boxes to manage how your users actually use those sizes. And the reason for that being is that there's always going to be a one-off project. There's always going to be an instance where we break our rules or bend our rules a little bit. In those situations, it's a lot faster and easier to come in here and uncheck a couple boxes than it is to sit down and make another segment, another size. As long as we're in here, everyone, excuse me, I want to point to another control or level of control that really does impact your calcs and your analytics. And that would be your fluids. A lot of the people I talk to who've gone through setting up Revit, they kind of skip this spot because they don't quite understand maybe how it works. So when you come into fluids here and we hit a drop down, you'll notice that you have water, propylene glycol from 10 to 90% mixture, ethylene glycol from 10 to 90% mixture. If we select any one of these, it then is assigned temperatures, a dynamic viscosity at that temperature and a density at that temperature. This goes right into Revit doing head pressure calcs for you. Assigning the right fluid can be done at the pipe system level. It cannot be done at the pipe type level. Yet another example of why we want to use pipe types and pipe systems in concert with each other, not one over the other. You'll also notice, guys and gals, that I can add another fluid. I can delete existing fluids. So I can create as many specific fluids as I would like and really start to dial in Revit analytics. I'm a big proponent of Revit analytics, guys, now that I've figured out how to get them to work. And the way that I figured out how to get them to work is, hey, I had to come in here and tune all these little dials to make sure that they were producing the numbers that I was expecting to see in my results. And so I always recommend that, especially if you're new to Revit or you're just starting to go down this template or starter project road of creating this environment, that you would at a bare minimum come in here and verify the numbers that you might use for the ones that are default out of the box. If you're going to create your own, obviously, gather your information before you start so you can just simply plug it right in. Okay. Now, when you go to going to get out of here and go into a system type. When you go into a system type, here is where you assign the fluid temperature. Here is where you assign the fluid type. Notice here that all the fluid types that are in there, I can find in this default dropdown. So guys, if you haven't been looking at that level of control, obviously take an opportunity to take a peek in there and look at that level of control and look at your results and your reporting and see if that's driving anything kind of crazy for you. All right. So we've talked a little bit about pipe types. We've talked a little bit about pipe systems. We've talked about system classification. We've talked about the difference between system classification and system type. And by all means, everyone, if there's still some confusion, please type in your questions or comments into the question or comment box, because I'd love to be able to make sure that everybody on the call is clear with that specific setup, simply because that drives so much of what pipes can do for you in Revit. The next thing I told you guys I wanted to talk to you guys about was the MEPPP and seeing what systems are inside the MEPPP. And so we'll go back there really quick, and I'm going to turn my thin lines back on. It's got to be honest with everybody. The thick lines drive me crazy. But if we look over here in the project browser at the pipe types and the pipe system types created for the MEPPP environment, you'll notice that we don't have a pipe type in the MEPPP environment that's based upon a system. They're all based upon Schedule 40 or a specific type that is used for specific system carrying, okay? So in the MEPPP, we are set up to pick the proper pipe type and assign the proper system to that pipe type. But then if we look at the piping systems, you'll notice that we've created quite a bit, okay? We did leverage the fire protection stuff for fire protection stuff, even though we know it doesn't do analytics, okay? Reason being is that there's a very small number of people doing fire protection design in Revit. If you have some interest in doing fire protection design in Revit and you want to propagate flow, you can leverage the hydronic system, or hydronic supply or hydronic return system classifications to be able to do that for you. But you'll notice here, everything's got a nice little prefix, so everything's nice and clean. It's easy to find. And if we go scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see how we marked the two system classifications that we absolutely did not use in any way, shape, manner, or form. And that is the ZZ, do not use. ZZ, so its prefix is at the bottom, and that's the other in the vent system classifications that we didn't leverage in any way, shape, manner, or form. Remember, we cannot delete them. So the only thing we could do is try to kind of put them down at the bottom of the list, put them in the corner, if you will, and embarrass them for being the ones that actually don't do any work for us. So now that we know, or we've seen rather, the systems that are inside the MEPPP, I want to take a look at how we're doing some of the control inside of the MEPPP. How can we set up some of these views and things to not only show us the pipes and the systems that we need to see, but how can we take that a step further and actually start driving some efficiencies with that, driving some design efficiencies rather with that. And so I'm simply going to right click on one of these, doesn't really matter which one, and go into the type properties and look at the abbreviation. I told you I'd be coming back here and say, why is this so important? Well, abbreviations are pretty standard inside a firm. At least I would hope that your abbreviations for a pipe system are pretty standard inside your firm. If you're a multidisciplinary firm and you have some industrial piping and some plumbing, there may be some things that you need to work out in terms of everybody having a unique system abbreviation for their systems. Now, why is this important? This is important when it comes to visibility control. And if you've dealt with pipes for a long time in Revit and you've heard me talk on these topics before, you probably know exactly where I'm going. And I'm going up here to my view tab, and I'm coming in here to filters. I love Revit filters as a piping designer. These are the only things that have ever been able to create an environment for me where things are just showing up the way that they should be in every view. And as I show you here, I'm going to try to get some scroll going. You see, for example, this one that's highlighted right now, piping system compressed air. We I should say we at CTC, excuse me guys, CTC wrote all the filters based upon system classification. Or system classification, excuse me, system abbreviation. So you see the CA here is working. Notice how it is set to equals. So that means if it's a lowercase c, uppercase A, it's not going to work. It needs to match this character by character, case by case. If you can standardize this process, you can put your system abbreviations in all your pipe systems, sit down here, write a bunch of filters based upon that system abbreviation, then go in and apply those to the specific view templates that you would want to put in each specific view, so that you could simply have confidence in that plumbing pipe drawn in a plumbing view shows up. Hydronic pipe drawing in a hydronic view shows up. If I don't want hydronic piping showing up on the plumbing view, I just apply those filters and I tell those filters to not show those system types, and then it doesn't show up in that view. Okay, so that is exactly what we have set here inside of the MEPPP environment. And I can actually show you very quickly. I'll come in here and just draw a pipe. I'm not even going to care what the system, or excuse me, what the pipe type is, but I do care what the system type is. Notice that the system type is natural gas. It's an MP. If I go ahead and draw this pipe, you'll notice it's visible. I'm in a working view. It's grayed and dashed inside of this working view. It's because the work set filter is taking over inside of the MEPPP. This is one of the things that I was gonna get to, but now's as good a time to talk about it as any. In the MEPPP, we have a work set filter inside of the working views, and that allows you to help users maintain their work set discipline. So this is a plumbing view I'm in. We've simply created a filter here that says anything that's not on the plumbing work set, turn it grayed and dashed. As soon as I take it off the work set that it's on, which would be shared levels and grids right here, I would go down here, find it, put it on the plumbing. So we see how it shows there, okay? And then of course that would be a notification to the users to go ahead and change to the proper work set to be working on plumbing. Now let's go ahead and draw another pipe. But this pipe, we're going to put on a different system type. And so I'm going to put this on geothermal water. And I'm going to draw this pipe here very quickly as well. Notice how it still shows up. It's on the right work set. I'm in a working view, right? It's not grayed and dashed, it's still there. Now let's go to a construction document and take a look at what this might look like. So if I go to my construction document, I'll scroll out here. You notice how only one of those pipes is shown, okay? And it's the geothermal water. The other pipe is completely gone. So we have the geothermal water to be set to be shown in this view, okay? So that's how we're going to how you can leverage filters, is you can predefine your system types, predefine something as simple as a system abbreviation, base your filters on that, apply that to all your views, and then all of a sudden things just show up where they are supposed to show up in the proper views. And I noticed we had some more questions come in here, and I'll just start answering these. Question about any plans to add additional piping systems into the MEPPP for healthcare and medical industry. Great question. For those of you who don't know, I used to work for CTC, and that's why I still screw up and say we all the time as referring to the MEPPP. That was a conversation that we had very early on when we were creating the MEPPP, and we just decided to not put healthcare stuff in there for lots of different reasons. It doesn't mean that you can't do that to the environment as well. There are some plans to look at and expand the MEPPP on a regular basis, guys. It's always being expanded. There are all sorts of things that can be added by you or that we can add, okay? So I'm just actually getting a note here from one of the people who happens to be here today is one of the guys who actually works on the MEPPP. Thank you, sir, for chiming in here. Apparently, they've recently started discussing adding medical piping systems, so look for that in some future release. Obviously, there's a new release that just came out. There'll be another new release coming out in the near future. Pay attention to that, guys, because that may have the medical piping systems that you're looking for. So we have a question here about how do I get filters and such. So if you have the MEPPP, you're going to have the filters under the Manage tab, and just simply go in, or actually not the Manage tab, the View tab, and go into the filters, and the filter list will be right there. In the event that you're not leveraging this and you're creating this from the ground up, standard Revit icons down here at the bottom, create new, duplicate, rename, and delete. So if you need to create a new filter, you would simply create new. Let's give this filter a name. We're going to make a rules-based filter, click OK, and then now we can start defining the rules under which that filter can operate. Okay, you have drop downs here for and or filters, and then you also have all the different types of settings that you could do, including adding rules, adding sets. You could really get detailed with filters. I don't want to get too much into filters, guys, because that's a good topic for another webinar. As a matter of fact, if you search the YouTube channels, you'll probably find my webinar, I Heart Filters, where I really start breaking down filters and how we can stack them and apply them for piping systems. Got another question here. What's the recommendation for handling piping in demolition views in regards to filtering by system abbreviation? Great question. Piping and demo create some challenges for us, especially if we want to demo half of a linear length of pipe, for example. Obviously, Revit is tuned for you to use the phasing controls. So demo is an action that occurs at a phase. The MEPPP is set up to leverage that. One of the things that I have recommended to other clients as well is that if you do have to demo, say like half a pipe, for example, you make what we commonly refer to up north here as hockey puck connectors, because we all know if we set something to be demoed, that it strips its system data, strips all the data that we want from it. By making a simple hockey puck connector fitting, and it's literally like, it doesn't have to be anything graphical, guys, it's just for data that you can pop on the end of a fitting or pop on the end of the pipe, but you can use that to redesignate what the system is, what the flows are, and everything there, so that the pipe from that connect into existing point then carries information down it for the rest of the system. So those are some workarounds that I've used in the past to be able to get over a lot of that. Oh, we got a question here about work sets and system classification type. Work sets are very commonly used, obviously, for lots of different reasons and lots of different firms. But work sets aren't tied to system classifications. You could do a work set for each system classification type. That is something that I'd obviously want to discuss with you a little bit further, because I want to understand exactly how you're trying to apply that and what for, if it's for visibility controls or if it's for some analytical reasons or if it's for user control. Because let's face it, a lot of the times our users go rogue and they simply don't follow the methods that we've implemented inside of our packs and use to increase their efficiencies. So thanks for the questions, guys. This is great. This is great to have this many questions in a webinar. So I noticed that we got about 15 minutes left on the webinar. And so there's one more thing that I wanted to hit for you guys, and that's how you're leveraging content to produce more efficient models. What are some of the things that we can do from a content perspective for plumbing and piping? And I'm going to go to another feature here inside of the MEPPP, guys, because it's near and dear to my heart. It's something that we came up originally with the guys who did this, the MEPPP from the beginning, and that's the use of model groups. Now, model groups are typically deployed when you have very common designs repeating themselves. So if you do a lot of hospital design, or you do a lot of apartments or educational dorm rooms, things like that, the idea was that you would design, one of the 5 apartment types, for example. You would design one of those, you would group that, and then you would simply place that every place that specific unit showed up in the plan. And then I only had to adjust one group and all the other groups would adjust, okay? It's a pretty slick workflow until we have to go and connect in domains when we have to ungroup everything. But it's a nice workflow as we're going through, let's say, a DD phase and even earlier times in a CD phase. But what they did in the MEPPP is they took this group workflow and they kind of inverted it. The MEPPP, for example, guys, is a starter project. It's not a Revit template file. It's not a .rte file. And so when you have an actual project, you can create groups, house them inside of the MEPPP, and then leverage them for the situation. So for example, right here, actually guys, I'm gonna go back to my working view for this because it shows up a little bit better. Right here, I have a back-to-back wall hung ADA configuration. Right below that, I have a back-to-back non-ADA wall hung configuration. The connections that happen between the 2 water closets here in the chase are pretty typical, pretty common, right? I can pre-do a lot of this work prior to having to place it. And so if you use that method of thinking and you go out here and say, okay, let's create a group for a back-to-back ADA chase assembly, I'll come over here to my list of groups and I'll find my wall hung ADA back-to-back, simply click and drag and drop that into the project. Now you see here with one click, I have placed the carrier, sanitary, vent, domestic, and a clean out. Now, if you keep it grouped, there's another layer of control that you can go to, and that's attaching the details. So as it's grouped, if I come up here to say attach detail, pick the proper one, all my tags are here. Okay. Now let's say I will take the second one here and place that so it's a back-to-back ADA wall hung, or not ADA, excuse me. So there's my wall hung back-to-back. I will drag and drop that in as well and click to place. Go ahead and attach the detail group so that my tags come in. Now, obviously, I would want to go through the process of aligning these things and making sure they're fitting with water closets and everything else. For the purposes of this webinar, everybody, I'm just going to go use my align tool really quick, and I'm going to make sure that these 2 groups align with each other. Once I've done that, it's as simple as selecting both groups, no, not the detail groups, the actual groups themselves, and ungrouping them. Now that they're ungrouped, guys, they're native Revit elements. So I simply drag sanitary to sanitary, vent to vent, domestic. If I'm a good modeler and I'm paying attention, I'm going to delete this pipe and I'm going to close the domestic system. And there, everyone, I just did 4 water closets. So you guys can see here that this group workflow really does apply really well to plumbing. It also applies to hydronic piping. You can think of any configuration that is common, from a boiler connection to a boiler room, to a hydronic coil connection, to a chase assembly. You'll notice here as we scroll down that we have drain assemblies for floor drains for different sizes, both vertical and horizontal configurations, equipment assemblies for water heaters, fixture assemblies for when a chase is not in play, kitchen equipment. All of this is there to speed up that tediousness of having to, all right, I got to do this. Let's go get a carrier. Oh, crap, we don't have the right carrier in our library. Let me go out to the internet. Let me find the right carrier. Let me get it downloaded. Oh, it doesn't populate my schedules. Now I got to process it. We're saving all that type of time, or excuse me, type of work and the time that it generates by simply getting out in front of that and introducing a little bit more of a standard, if you will, with some of this plumbing. Now, you'll notice here down at the bottom, I just want to show you this really quick, because the guys who do the MEPPP are also engineers and designers as well. So they're feeling the pain too and the pressure. And so they have done enough here to let us come down and grab the restroom assembly groups, okay? So here you're going to be able to see that we can do entire restrooms very, very quickly by placing one group, simply coming back, adding our tags. Then of course we would ungroup that, becomes native Revit elements, and we start doing our design. So with that, everybody, I see we got about 8 minutes left. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I'm going to turn my attentions to questions at this time and hopefully get them all answered here in the last couple minutes. We got a question about I am having some challenges at times creating connectors for fittings on pipes, ducts, and equipment. Example of how it works with system classification. I can go ahead and let's go into that system split T. Why not? Let's edit that family, and I hope I got enough time to do this. I'm going to try to do this really quickly, and hopefully I answer your question. So when you look at a connector, right? Here's the connector elements. We notice that the flow is configured, it's calculated, right? But see here, system classification. We have to make sure that this is set for the system classification we want to carry, or global. Global is a very underutilized system setting when it comes to connectors. You'll notice that here's all the different system classes. This is the system split T, and so this is how we force that cross-system functionality so Revit doesn't break that down for us. But if you come down here to global, global is the setting that's applied, so whatever system that fitting or that connector is seeing, it's applied automatically to whatever family that connector is on. So global is a really good setting for something like a Titus 350R grill. A Titus 350R grill, for example, that can be an exhaust grill, it can be an outdoor air grill, it can be a return grill, it can be lots of different things. And we wouldn't want to make that family 5 different times so that the connector could have the right system classification, for example. We can make it once, set the connector to global, and then now just connector designate the proper systems to it, and it will do the rest for us. Got a question about the boiler assembly and what's listed in the boiler assembly. So I'll go ahead and I'll place that right now for you guys so you guys can take a peek at that. Oh, fixtures, there we are. And there's, for example, is the gas water heater assembly here. So you can see everything that's there. And then I will place as well the electric water heater with the janitor sink next to that. And then on platform. Now it's important to keep in mind, guys, that like, as I'm showing you this, this may not be what you would designate. You can edit these groups at any time. You can change out the system types, you can change out the pipe types, you can change out the pieces of equipment, you can really use these to drive your standard. And the whole idea behind this is not to necessarily do all the work, but to get you way farther faster than you typically would if you had to be doing this by individual part and piece. Got a question about where the editing of those groups lives. Absolutely, I can show you where all those groups live. So I will come in here real quickly. Boom. Working mechanical model groups is the view that where we've buried them inside of the MEPPP. But if you're going to use this workflow and you're going to incorporate this on your own, obviously we recommend that there's a view that you have to see all these groups, but you want to kind of bury them, if you will, to make sure that your users just aren't going through all willy-nilly and changing things. Yep. Here's where all the groups live, everybody. So this is where the groups are placed, designated. I can come into any one of these groups, click on that, click Edit Group. You'll notice that when you're editing a group, your screen turns kind of beige. And then I can go in and I can make changes to this group. So this is the detail group. If I cancel out of that and actually click on the plumbing group itself to make sure I clicked on that pipe, right? You'll notice how I can't click on that. So one of the things that they did inside of the MEPPP is they buried this under its own design option. And the reason for that is so that people aren't coming in here all willy-nilly and fixing things, or just, excuse me, changing things on a one-off basis. So when I switch to that design option, it's going to take just a moment here. I'll be able to select that, edit that group, and then of course that's updated every place that group is already placed. So if I click on that, you see I can edit that group, and this is where I can come in and start changing things. For example, if I wanted to stretch this pipe, I can make that change. And of course, if I save that, it's saved if everything is still grouped all over the place. So I'll go ahead and cancel out of that, guys. We're 2 minutes to the hour. Want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've got a couple other questions coming in here. Asking questions about adding mechanical groups to the pack. You've seen here that we've got some boilers and stuff in there, so that's starting to come in. I assume, guys, that type of workflow is only going to grow. We've been able to demonstrate how efficient it is, how successful it can be, and so I would pay attention to what the new releases are, what CTC is bringing out. You will definitely start to see some more groups inside of the pack. You can see some more groups inside of the pack from the updated release versus the release prior already. So definitely focusing on that. Got a question here about my MEPPP is from 2018. Is it worth the upgrade to 2020 MEPPP to get the updates? My humble opinion is yes, absolutely. The 2019 version did a lot of upgrades on the mechanical and plumbing side, and a huge amount of upgrades to the lighting features in the electrical side. If you're using the MEPPP at all for electrical lighting design, this upgrade is definitely worth the price. If you are using it for mechanical and plumbing design, I would argue that it is definitely worth the price. We've added groups, we've added more functionality, we've added more schedules, we've cleaned up a lot of the visibility issues that were there with the original ideas we had around the very flexible content that have been created. All that has been put to bed. So I would definitely recommend that at the very least, you take a peek at what's been changed. You can schedule the demo with ATG, obviously, with me at any time, and I'll walk you through what's changed. You can also go onto CTC's website and download the MEPPP information kit, which will have a list of everything that was upgraded for the 2019 release. So again, everybody, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for being ATG customers and spending a little bit of your time with me today. I really do appreciate it. Everybody, go forth and happy modeling to you.